When you enter into prison, there is what you see and there is what you can feel. My name is Nagham Awada. I work as a spokesperson with the International Committee of the Red Cross in Iraq. As a spokesperson, as a communication person, I sometimes accompany my colleagues who work in detention, who visit prisons, to be able to understand what is actually our work in prison. Of course, we visit all kinds of detainees, but mostly detainees who are security detainees, who are detained reasons related to an armed conflict. There is a big debate, especially nowadays, about because they have done terrible things, some people should not have the same rights. The question is not about what they have done. There are specific rules that should be applied to everybody, whatever is their crime. The Geneva Conventions and the international humanitarian law is more important than ever today because most wars are fought in urban settings. So they are affecting mainly the same people that should not be targeted. Specifically civilians and prisoners. A few years ago, I was visiting a hospital during a conflict. I came across a man who was wearing a uniform stained with blood. He was working for the civil defense, so he was someone who was involved in rescuing the wounded. He had taken his wife and his daughter to the building of the civil defense because he thought they would be safe there. He told me he came back to the building of the civil defense and there was an airstrike that hit it. And his daughter got killed, his wife got burned. And the blood he had on his uniform was the blood of his daughter. She had died a few days earlier, and he simply didn't want to remove his uniform. It was his daughter's blood. And really, I will never forget his face. I chose this profession because I grew up in a conflict zone. I come from Lebanon. So I lived the civil war when I was a child. I had to flee my country several times. I can say that I have lived an experience that made me closer to what displaced or refugees have gone through. I used to work as a journalist and as a field producer for the media, but what really prompted me to start working in the humanitarian field was a personal experience. I was in South Lebanon. The area was besieged. At some point, no food and no medical aid could enter. I remember when the Icrc's president arrived, it impacted me visually, this image of someone coming to really make a statement, to say, we are here, we have not forgotten you. And after that, I had the feeling that it wasn't enough to report about wars. I want to go beyond that. I think being a woman aid worker is definitely a plus, because in many places women can access while men cannot. For example, in prisons, most of our delegates are women. They can access both women's prisons and men's prisons. Even men who are in a vulnerable situation are more willing to speak to women. I think to be able to do this kind of work, you have to be really resistant. You have to be able to cope with suffering, to stay also connected with what is beautiful, not to get too overwhelmed by the suffering. Recently, it was also in Mosul, I met a family, and the woman and the man, they both got burnt. So it is so, physically visible what happened to them, and they lost a son and they lost several family members. And what they tell you is, how can we live here again? So sometimes the way it affects me is that I'm constantly thinking of these people and thinking, what will happen with them? What will happen with them? What kind of hope can they have? What kind of hope can we give them? And sometimes you would really like to have answers. In the morning when I wake up, my first thought is, I hope I will have enough strength today to go through the day. There is a tendency when we talk about conflict zones, about places at war, about refugees, or of always wanting to depict the sad aspects, the sadness. But in fact, there is life, there is hope in everywhere. Even when you visit a prison, you have really some small elements that show you that life goes on. And this is something I really want to convey in my work. I'm trying always to convey the positive stories, the stories that are giving hope. For the persons who have lived these wars, it's important that they are not only identified as victims. One positive story that I recently witnessed was an encounter between two young women. Both are from Iraq. Both lost their leg as a result of war. One of them has become what we call motivational speaker. This other young woman is from Mosul. She lost her leg during a strike on her house. Her husband left her after she lost her leg. And we took Zainab to meet Zainab. She shared with her what she had herself gone through, how difficult it was for her for many, many years to accept her condition. And now she has become someone who is recognized, well-known, who is capable of supporting others, of helping others, she has become someone, now she's one of the biggest social media influencer. And the young Zainab from Mosul, who was so ashamed of her leg, now has regained confidence in herself. And one very funny thing is that when we shared the story on our social media platform, she started receiving lots of proposals of men who want to get married with her. When I was a kid, I was extremely shy. I really don't understand myself how I got from being an extremely shy person to becoming a spokesperson. But I think I'm really interested in the people. For sure, I have sacrificed a certain freedom, being away from my family, from my friends. In many times you feel lonely, you feel you are away maybe from what resembles you even. My fondest memory is I was working on a rescue ship, and we rescued a young man who was wounded, and I spent about an hour talking to him. He was fleeing Libya. He had fled. He had fled a killing, basically, and he survived. And he wrote to me a few times, and he wrote to me that I gave him the courage, and that now he has a bright future because I gave him the courage. And for me, I was not the person who rescued him. I was not the person who treated him. I was not the doctor. I just listened to him. That's all I did. What amazes me is how life always finds its way. I never lost complete hope in the human race. Even in the most darkest minds, I'm sure there is a piece of beauty. I have worked in Lebanon, in the Mediterranean Sea, in Tunisia, Libya and Iraq. What I've noticed through all the people I met, whether they were refugees, displaced people who have gone through a really what we call protracted displacement, which means they have been, for example, refugees for tens of years, like, for example, the Palestinian refugees or the migrants crossing the Mediterranean because they were thinking of a better future. All of these people, what they have in common is just they want to live in peace, and they want to have hope, and they want to be able to build a future. There are two fights I would like to fight mainly for. It's women's rights, because I think that is incredible how women are still not considered as complete human beings in many parts of the world. And my other fight would be for environment. If I had a life mission statement, it would be never give up.